I'm Vera Castellano, 58 years old, and I was the first woman to fly the Harrier in combat from my home air station, a brigadier general in the United States Marine Corps. For 40 years, I gave that uniform everything I had, while the people at my own family's table reduced all of it to a joke they like to call expensive joyrides. But when a young Marine waved me off the VIP stand at the Airshow where I was the guest of honor, the truth finally said itself out loud, in front of thousands. Have you ever been dismissed by the very people who should have been the proudest of you? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever had to stand quietly in your own worth while someone tried to take it from you, hit that like button and subscribe. In my father's house, the Marine Corps had exactly one job, and it was done on foot, in the dirt, with a rifle. He said it so often it stopped being an opinion and became the weather. I was 11 years old the summer I first understood that the thing I wanted most in the world was a thing my own family had already decided was a joke. It was 1979, and our house sat close enough to the air station that the jets came over the roof on their way to the pattern. I would sit on the back step in the evening and wait for them. There was a particular sound a Harrier made when it transitioned, a deep, tearing roar that you felt in your sternum before you heard it in your ears, and when it passed over our yard, the dishes hummed in the rack and the dog hid under the porch, and I felt, for about 4 seconds, completely alive. My father, Salvatore Castellano, had carried a rifle for the Marine Corps for 20 years, and he had the back and the knees to prove it. To him, the men who flew were a kind of expensive cab service. He would point his fork at the window when a jet went over and deliver the line he must have said 1,000 times across my childhood. "Planes are taxis," he would say. "The Corps is the man who gets off the plane." Everyone at the table would nod, because in that house you nodded. My brother, Wesley, was 4 years older than me, and he learned to nod before I did. Wesley wanted, more than anything, to be the kind of son our father respected. And he figured out early that the cheapest way to earn that respect was to stand where our father stood and laugh at what our father laughed at. One afternoon, I had a little plastic model jet I had saved 3 weeks of allowance for, and Wesley took it out of my hands and held it up to the light like it was something he had found stuck to his shoe. "Planes are taxis," he said, doing the voice, and our father laughed, and that was the first time I learned that the people who are supposed to be on your side will sometimes borrow your enemy's words because the laugh is easier than the loyalty. The only person in that house who did not nod was my mother. Estelle Castellano was a quiet woman who had learned a long time before I was born that you did not win an argument with my father. You simply waited him out and did what you were going to do anyway. Late one night when I was 14, she came into my room and set 2 things on my bed. The first was a library book about naval aviation with a cracked plastic cover. The second was an empty shoebox. I asked her what the box was for. "For your clippings," she said. "Anything you ever do that they put in a paper, you put it in here and you don't show anybody and you don't wait for anybody to ask." Then she said the thing I would carry for the next 40 years. "You don't have to win them over, Vera. You just have to go." So I planned to go. I did not announce it for years because I had learned what announcing things cost in our house, but at my high school graduation in 1986, when an aunt asked me what I was going to do now, I said it out loud at the table for the first time. I said I was going to fly Marine jets. The table went quiet in the particular way our table went quiet, which was less like surprise and more like a group of people deciding together not to embarrass themselves by taking something seriously. Then Wesley laughed. He was 22 by then, already out of a short enlistment that had not gone the way he wanted, and he had a way of laughing that was really a way of closing a door. "You?" he said. "You'll be lucky to fold the maps." My father did not laugh, and he did not defend me. He just went back to his plate, which was worse. That night, I sat on the back step with my mother's shoebox in my lap, empty, and waited for a jet to come over. When it did, when the roar climbed up through the soles of my feet and the dishes hummed, I made myself a promise that I would keep for 40 years and that almost nobody in my family would ever fully see. I promised myself that I would go and that I would not spend my one life waiting on the back step for a man to look up from his plate and tell me he was proud. I was a girl on a back step, watching jets I had been told I had no business wanting, holding an empty box my mother had given me to fill. I filled it. It was not a straight line, and it was not easy. I worked through college on a scholarship I had to fight for, and I did the platoon leaders course in the summers, which meant that while other students were lifeguarding or sleeping in, I was at Quantico, learning that my body could do more than I had been told it could. I came home from those summers leaner and harder and quieter, and my father would look at me across the table like I was a science experiment that had not yet failed, but probably would. Wesley took to asking me, every time I came home, whether I had washed out yet, the way you might ask after a cold you expect someone to still have. I had not washed out. I never washed out of anything. That was the part none of them understood about me, that the dismissals did not weaken the thing in me, they annealed it, the way heat does not destroy good steel but sets it. Every time someone in that house told me I would not make it, they were not putting out the fire. They were forging the blade. I do not think a single one of them ever knew they were doing it. 4 years later, in 1990, I stood in a hot room in my brand new second lieutenant's uniform and raised my right hand and swore the oath. And across the country, my father shook my hand afterward, like I was a stranger he was being introduced to at a funeral. "Officer, huh?" he said. "We'll see if it sticks." That was the whole of it. We'll see if it sticks. Wesley was there too, and Wesley had a different angle. He had not finished his own enlistment cleanly, and so my commissioning sat on him like a splinter he could not reach. "Anybody can get a bar pinned on," he told me by the punch bowl. "It's the timing that counts. The real time. You wouldn't know about that yet." I was 22 and I let it go because I had somewhere to be that did not require his permission. Where I had to be was flight school, and flight school did not care whose daughter I was. That was the first place in my life where the only thing that counted was whether I could do the thing in front of me, and I found out that I could. I learned to fly in the training pipeline the way you learn a language by being dropped in the country, badly at first and then all at once. There were instructors who did not think a woman ought to be in the cockpit, and they did not hide it, and I beat them the only way you can beat that kind of thing, which is by being undeniable. You do not argue a man out of his certainty about you. You fly the profile better than he expected, and you keep your mouth shut and you let the grade sheet do the talking. I had been training for exactly that fight my whole childhood, without knowing it. My family had given me, without meaning to, a perfect education in how to keep going while people who outranked me in the room decided I did not belong in it. In 1992, I earned my wings as a naval aviator, and I mailed the photograph home, the one from winging day, me in my flight suit with the gold wings on my chest and a grin I could not have wiped off with a towel. My mother framed it. I found out years later that my father took it out of the frame and put it in a drawer, and that the frame sat empty on the shelf for a while until my mother quietly put a picture of the dog in it so the empty frame would stop being a statement. In 1994, I made captain, and I was selected to fly the AV-8B Harrier, the same jet that had rattled the dishes over our back step when I was a girl, and you would think that would have moved something in my father, the symmetry of it, but symmetry was not a language he spoke. The family had settled on its story about me by then, and the story was 3 words long. Vera plays airplanes. That was the file they had on me, and they were not interested in updates. The updates came anyway. By 2001, I was a major, and at a holiday dinner that year, Wesley found the line that would become the family's permanent shorthand for me. He had moved into a phase where he talked a great deal about taxes and waste, and he looked at me across the ham and said, "You know what one of those joyrides costs the taxpayer? Per hour. That's my tax dollars buying my sister a thrill." He was pleased with it. I watched him be pleased with it. Expensive joyrides. It got a laugh, and because it got a laugh, it never left. And for the next 15 years, any time my name came up at a family table, somebody would say the word joyride, and the table would do its small, comfortable laugh and move on. The only counterweight was a phone line and a shoebox. My mother called me one evening in 2002 after one of those dinners, and I could hear her keeping her voice low so my father would not hear her taking my side. "I'm saving every article," she said. "Everyone. They'll catch up to you, Vera, or they won't. Either way, I am keeping the proof." I told her she did not have to. She told me the box was already half full and she was not asking my opinion. So there it was. A winging day photograph face down in a drawer in my parents' house, and 3 towns away, a shoebox quietly filling with everything that drawer refused to hold. For a long time, those 2 boxes were the whole map of how my family saw me, and I flew anyway because my mother had taught me the one thing that mattered. You do not have to win them over. You just have to go. What none of them knew, what I had not told them, because I had stopped expecting them to care, was where the going had taken me. Between 2003 and 2005, I flew the Harrier in combat over Iraq. I was the first woman to fly that aircraft in combat from our home air station, the same line my father had called a taxi stand, and I came home with a Bronze Star and 2 air medals and a set of memories I did not bring to the dinner table because the dinner table had never once made room for them. I flew close air support for Marines who were doing exactly the job my father respected, carrying rifles in the dirt, and more than one of them got to go home because I was overhead when it counted. My father never knew the details. He would not have wanted them. They complicated the story. There is one night I have never been able to put down, and I will tell you a piece of it because it is the truest answer I have to the word joyride. It was 2004, late, and a patrol of Marines had gotten pinned in a place they should not have been, taking fire from 2 sides, and the radio call that came up to me had a sound in it that you do not forget. The sound of a young voice doing arithmetic about how this ends. I came down the line, low and slow, with everything I had, and I put what I carried exactly where it needed to go. Close, danger close. Close enough that the men on the ground felt it in their own chests, the way I had felt the jets on the back step when I was a girl. And the firing stopped, and the young voice came back up on the radio, and it was steadier now, and it said, "Thank you, ma'am." And it said a few other things that I will keep. Those Marines went home. They have children now. Not one of them has ever called what I did that night a taxi ride, and not one of them has ever wondered out loud what it cost the taxpayer. They know exactly what it cost and exactly what it bought. The only people who never understood the price were the people at my own table. In 2007, I took command of a squadron as a lieutenant colonel. In 2013, I made colonel and commanded a group. The promotions came in their order, and I learned each new job, and I stopped, somewhere in there, mailing photographs home, because a photograph you send into silence is just a thing you are throwing away with extra steps. My father died in 2015. He was 79. I flew home for the funeral in my dress blues because whatever he had thought of the uniform, it was the uniform. And I was not going to bury my father out of it. He had never said he was proud of me. Not once, not in any language, not on any subject. But it landed hardest about the flying, because the flying was the truest thing I had ever done. I stood at his grave, and I waited to feel the old ache, and instead I felt something quieter and stranger, which was the understanding that the proud I had been waiting for was never coming, and that I was going to have to be all right anyway. In 2019, I was promoted to Brigadier General. 1 star. The little girl from the back step pinned a general's star to her collar, and somewhere across the country, a shoebox got a new clipping. And my brother Wesley said, when my mother told him, "A general." "Of what exactly? Of airplanes?" I heard about it later. It did not even sting by then. I had run out of things to prove somewhere over Iraq, and I had not gone looking for new ones. I retired in 2022, a brigadier general with a wall of things my family had never asked to see, and I thought, more or less, that the story was over. The men who doubted me were old or gone. The line I had flown was still there. I had made my peace with the empty frame on my parents' shelf. I figured the rest of my life would be quiet. Then, in the spring of 2026, the air station called and asked if I would come back as the guest of honor for the anniversary Airshow. And I said yes, and I drove to the one place on Earth that had always seen me clearly, the flight line. And a 21-year-old in a uniform decided I did not belong there. I got to the field early on purpose. The show did not open to the public until 10 in the morning, and I was through the gate by 7, because I did not want a podium first. I wanted 10 minutes alone with the runway before the crowd came. I wanted to walk the static display line in the early light with nobody watching and stand under the wing of a Harrier, the way I had stood under one when I was a girl, and feel the thing in my sternum one more time before the speeches started. I dressed for that, not for the speeches. I wore a plain navy blazer and slacks and comfortable shoes, no uniform, no stars, no ribbons, just the credential lanyard they had mailed me. The one that said guest of honor in letters I had not bothered to read closely because I knew what it was. I looked, I am sure, like exactly what I appeared to be, which was a 58-year-old woman in civilian clothes wandering a flight line. That was fine. That was, in fact, the whole point. For one morning, I did not want to be a rank. I wanted to be a person who used to fly. I walked the line. The static displays were lined up the way they always are, nose to tail, tow bars down, the canopy still beaded with the night's dew. There is a smell to a flight line in the early morning, jet fuel and cut grass and cold metal, and it went into me like a key into a lock. I had walked 1,000 lines exactly like that one, in the dark, before briefs, in the years when this was simply my life, and not yet a thing anyone wanted to honor. A young plane captain was doing his walk around on one of the display jets, and he nodded at me the way you nod at a stranger, and I nodded back, and he had no idea he was nodding at someone who had spent more hours under that kind of wing than he had been alive. I liked that. I liked being nobody on that line for one morning. There is a particular peace in being unknown in the one place you were most yourself. I stood under the Harrier, I put my hand flat on the cool skin of the intake, and I let the years come up through my palm, and it was everything I had driven there for. I thought about the girl on the back step. I thought about how far it is, in miles and in years, from a back step where you are told you are nothing to the underside of the very aircraft you were told you had no business wanting. And how the distance is at once enormous and nothing at all, because the girl and the general are the same person, and the only thing that ever separated them was the simple decision to go. Then the field began to fill. The volunteers and the early families and the Marines in their service uniforms, setting up the ropes, and I made my way back toward the reviewing stand, where I'd been told a seat was waiting for me at the front. The reviewing stand was a raised structure at the center of the show line, the VIP section, with a set of stairs at one end guarded, that morning, by a young Marine corporal on the usher detail. He was maybe 21. His uniform was sharp, and his haircut was sharper, and he had the particular posture of a young man who has been given a small amount of authority for the first time and intends to use all of it. I have commanded a great many young men exactly like him. I have been very fond of a great many young men exactly like him. They are the reason the Corps works, and they are, occasionally, a great deal of trouble. He stepped into my path at the bottom of the stairs. "This section's reserved, ma'am," he said. "Spectators are down on the flight line." He said it pleasantly enough, the way you would redirect someone who had gotten lost on the way to the restroom. I lifted my lanyard so he could read it. It was hanging right there on my chest. All he had to do was look at it. "I'm in the right place," I said. "It's all right." He glanced at the lanyard for about half a second, and his expression did a small thing I recognized. A thing I have watched cross 100 young faces. The decision that the easy call and the right call are the same call, because checking would be work. "Doesn't matter who printed that," he said, and the pleasantness had gone out of it now, replaced by the flat confidence of a man who has decided. "Step down. You're holding up the guests." There were guests by then, arriving behind me, a couple of older men in sport coats with their own lanyards, and the corporal gave me a small wave of his hand, a little shooing motion toward the general admission crowd down on the flight line, the kind of gesture you would use to move a dog off a couch. He had already turned his attention to the men behind me. In his mind, I was handled. Now. I want to tell you what I did, because it is the part people find hardest to believe. I stepped aside. I did not raise my voice. I did not produce identification. I did not say the words that would have ended his morning, the rank and the name that would have turned that smug little wave into the worst 30 seconds of his young career. 40 years of cockpits teaches you exactly one reflex worth keeping, and it is this. You do not argue with a child who thinks the stick is his. You let the situation develop. You wait for the picture to resolve. I had been ordered out of far more important rooms than that one by far more important people than that boy, and I had learned that the truth does not need me to shout it. The truth keeps its own schedule. So I stepped down off the bottom stair, and I stood there in the thickening crowd, a retired general in a navy blazer, and I watched a 21-year-old guard a staircase against the one person on the field the entire day had been built to honor. Behind him and above him, on the reviewing stand, the public address speakers crackled and came to life, and a voice I had not heard in years began to warm up the crowd, and I felt the morning tip toward the thing none of us could see coming yet. The voice on the speakers belonged to Hank Delgado. I knew it the second it filled the field. Hank had been a Marine, had flown in the back of more aircraft than he could count, and had the kind of warm gravel voice that air station announcers are grown in a lab to have. He had been emceeing shows on that line since before I made colonel. I did not know he was working this one, and hearing him say the opening lines of the program, the welcome, the safety brief, the history of the station, was like hearing a song from a part of your life you thought was over. "Ladies and gentlemen, Hank said, and the crowd began to settle. The families finding the rope line, the corporal at the foot of the stairs, straightening up the way you do when the official part begins. Welcome home! This air station has been putting Marines into that sky for a long time, and today we are honored, truly honored, to have with us the finest example of what that means. I was standing maybe 15 feet from the bottom of those stairs, hemmed in by the crowd, and I had a strange, floating sense of what was about to happen, and no way to stop it, and, honestly, no desire to. Our guest of honor today, Hank said, and I heard him smile through the words, is the first woman to fly the AV-8B Harrier in combat from this very line. A combat aviator, a squadron commander, a group commander, a general officer of the United States Marine Corps. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Brigadier General Vera Sabre Castellano. And the field turned. It is a thing I will never forget, the way several thousand people turned at once, looking for the guest of honor, looking up at the stand first, because that is where you would expect her to be, and then, when she was not on the stand, scanning the crowd. Sabre was my call sign. It had been painted on the side of my aircraft. Hank had said it the way you say a name that means something, and now the crowd was hunting for the face that went with it. The corporal at the foot of the stairs was looking around too. He was looking for the general. He did not yet understand that he had spent the last 2 minutes with his hand out, shooing her toward the cheap seats. I stood still and let it find me. A woman near me, holding a program with my photograph printed on the front of it, looked at the photo, and looked at my face, and looked at the photo, and her mouth opened. She touched my arm. "That's you," she said. "Ma'am, that's you." And then heads were turning toward me, and a space began to open in the crowd, the way a space opens around the person everyone has just realized they are looking for. And the corporal at the foot of the stairs followed all those turning heads until they pointed straight at the 58-year-old woman in the navy blazer he had just waved away. And I watched the color drain out of his face in real time. What happened next happened fast, and it came down the stairs. Major General Lionel Frost was the reviewing officer that day, the commanding general of the air station, 2 stars, and he had flown the line with me in the 2000s, when we were both younger and hungrier, and the war was on. Lionel and I had passed each other in the sky more times than either of us could count. When Hank said my name, Lionel had been up on the stand, and he did not wait for me to climb to him. He came down the VIP stairs, 2 at a time, a 2-star general in his service uniform, and he came to a stop directly in front of the corporal, who was now standing at a very confused and very rigid attention. "Corporal," Lionel said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "You're standing between me and the only reason any of us are here today. Step aside." The corporal stepped aside so fast he nearly went off the edge of the stair. Lionel walked past him, out into the crowd, straight to me, and he stopped, and he did the thing my father had never done in 80 years of being my father. He came to attention, and he saluted me, in front of several thousand people, on the line where I had learned to fly. "General Castellano," he said. "Ma'am, welcome home. We have been waiting for you." I returned the salute. My hand was steady. I had returned 10,000 salutes in my life, and I had never felt one the way I felt that one. Not because of the honor in it, though there was honor in it, but because of where I was standing when I got it, which was in the cheap seats, 15 feet from a staircase a child had just guarded against me. I want to be clear about something, because it matters to the rest of this story. In that moment, I had a choice. And the choice was very simple and very old. I could turn around and spend the salute, spend the whole turning crowd, spend the full weight of my rank on the corporal. I could make him the story. There is a version of that morning where I let myself do it, where 40 years of being waved off comes out of me all at once and lands on a 21-year-old who happened to be standing on the stairs when the dam broke. I looked at him. He was the color of paper. He had realized exactly what he had done, and the realizing was already worse than anything I could have added to it. My old squadron mate reached me before I could decide. Priya Anand had flown with me for years, retired a colonel, and she had driven 3 hours to see me honored. She came through the crowd and took my elbow and looked up at the stand and back at the white-faced corporal, and she said, dry as a desert, the truest thing anyone said to me all day. 40 years, she said, and they still make you show your papers at the door. She was right. But she was right about the wrong man. The corporal was not the door. The corporal was a kid who made a lazy call on a busy morning. The door was older than him. The door had my father's face. And the door was sitting right then, in the family section of that stand, in a seat with my brother Wesley's name on it. I told Priya I was fine. Then I looked back at the boy, frozen on the stairs, a 2-star general's order still ringing in his ears, and I made the decision that would shape the entire rest of the day. I decided I was not going to spend my honor humiliating a 21-year-old. I had been humiliated by experts. I knew exactly what it cost and exactly what it bought, which was nothing. I was not going to hand it down. Staff Sergeant Nadia Cordero got to the bottom of the stairs about 10 seconds too late to stop any of it, and about 10 seconds too early to let it go. She was the NCO in charge of the usher detail, and she had the look of a staff sergeant who has just watched one of her Marines step in something career-ending, which is a look of cold, total focus. She had Corporal Hargrove by the upper arm, and she was already relieving him, already walking him off the detail, and I could see the rest of it written on her face. The counseling statement, the write-up, the word getting around the unit that Hargrove was the one who waved off the general. I went up the stairs and I stopped her. "Staff Sergeant," I said. "A word." She came to attention. "Ma'am." "What's his name?" "Corporal Hargrove, ma'am." A pause. "Ma'am, I am handling it. This will not happen again." I looked at Hargrove. Up close, he was even younger than he had seemed from the crowd, and he was standing at the kind of attention you stand at when you would very much like the ground to open. "Corporal Hargrove," I said. "Look at me." He looked at me. To his credit, he did not look away. "You did your job badly for about 30 seconds, I said. "I did mine for about 30 years. I am telling you from the far end of that, neither one of those is the whole of a man. Do you understand me?" "Ma'am," he said, which is what a young Marine says when he does not trust himself to say anything longer. I turned back to Cordero. "I don't want him relieved," I said. "I don't want to write up. I don't want this to be the thing that follows him around." He guarded the stairs. That was the job he was given. He guarded them a little too well against the wrong person on the wrong morning, and he will remember it for the rest of his life without any help from a piece of paper. Let me keep him up here with me. That's the punishment I want. He stands next to me for the rest of the show. Cordero looked at me for a long moment, recalibrating, and then something in her face eased, because a good NCO knows the difference between a Marine who needs correcting and a Marine who has just corrected himself harder than you ever could. "Yes, ma'am," she said. So Corporal Hargrove spent the Airshow at my shoulder, and that is how I came to give a 21-year-old the thing nobody had given me at his age. We stood at the rail as the flying started. The opening act was a section of Harriers, and when they came down the line and the lead ship transitioned to the hover, right in front of the stand, the deep, tearing roar rolling up through the boards under our feet. I watched Hargrove's whole body react to it the way mine had on the back step when I was 11. You cannot fake that. The Corps is full of men who pretend to be unmoved by things that move them. And then there is the occasional one who is honest enough to let his face show it, and those are the ones worth keeping. "You feel that?" I said to him over the noise. "In your chest? That's the part they can't put on a recruiting poster." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and this time there was something underneath it. "I want to tell you why I did not destroy that boy, because I think it is the most important thing in this whole story, more important than the salute, more important than the crowd. I did not spare him because I am a saint. I spared him because I knew exactly what was in him, since it had once been in me, on the other side. The certainty he had shown me at the bottom of the stairs, the lazy, comfortable certainty that he knew who belonged and who did not, that is the exact thing that had been aimed at me my entire life. My father had it, Wesley had it, the instructors in flight school had it. It is the most ordinary failing in the world, the decision that checking is too much work and the easy call must be the right one. And the way you cure a person of it is not by breaking him. Breaking him just teaches him that the world is cruel and that he was right to guard the stairs. You cure him by showing him the thing he could not see, the lanyard he did not bother to read, and then by letting him live long enough to do it differently. I had been broken by experts, and it had taught me nothing except how to keep going while bleeding. I was not going to do that to a 21-year-old on the best day of my life. "Nobody up here was born belonging," I told him. I was watching the jet, not him, because some things are easier to say sideways. Not me, not the general who came down those stairs. Everybody up on this stand was, at some point, the kid at the bottom of the stairs. You guard them long enough, you do the job right, and one day you'll be the reason there's a crowd. But you have to learn to look at the lanyard, Corporal. You have to do the work of checking. The whole core is in the difference between the easy call and the right call. He did not say, "Yes, ma'am," that time. He just nodded and kept watching the sky, and I let him because the jet was saying it better than I could. Down in the stands, in the family section, my brother was watching all of it. I had not made a thing of inviting Wesley. My mother had wanted to come, and Wesley had driven her, and so he was there, 62 years old, in a folding chair in the section reserved for the guest of honor's family, watching his sister decline to destroy the boy who had wronged her, and instead stand him up at the rail like a protege. He had no script for that. His whole life, his entire understanding of me, ran on a single track. I was soft, I was small, I played airplanes. The woman up on that stand, the one a two-star had saluted in front of thousands, the one who had just shown a corporal more mercy in 30 seconds than our father had shown either of us in a lifetime, did not fit on his track at all, and I could see, even from the stand, that the not fitting was doing something to him. Major General Frost was not done with me. When the opening act cleared the line, Hank handed him the microphone, and Lionel stood at the rail with the whole field in front of him, and he read my record out loud. He read the combat tours, he read the Bronze Star and what it was for, the close air support, the Marines who came home because of it. He read the first woman milestone, on that line, in that aircraft. He read the squadron command, and the group command, and the star. He read it the way you read something you are proud of, slowly, letting each line land, and the crowd applauded between the lines. And I stood there and listened to a man say, over loudspeakers, to thousands of strangers, every single sentence my own family had refused to let me say at their table. Every word out of his mouth was a word my father would not use. I had spent 4 decades waiting for those words from one old man who would not say them, and here they were, free, public, true, coming out of the sky and the speakers and a friend's mouth, and I understood, standing there, that I had been waiting at the wrong door my whole life. The recognition I wanted was never going to come from the table. It was always going to come from the line. When Lionel finished, the crowd was on its feet. And in the family section, in a sea of standing people, there was one man still sitting down, and it was my brother, and he was not sitting down out of spite. He was sitting down because he had just realized he was the only one who had spent 40 years getting it wrong. I have thought a great deal since that day about what it must have been like to be Wesley in that folding chair, to sit in a section reserved for the family of the guest of honor and to understand, slowly, line by line, as a general read it out, that the honored guest was the little sister you had spent your whole life making small. Everything he had built his sense of himself on, the idea that he was the real one and I was the pretender, the one who got off the plane versus the one who only drove it, was being dismantled in public by a 2-star general with a microphone, and there was nothing he could do about it but sit there and listen. I did not enjoy it. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect that I did, that there was some private satisfaction in watching my brother absorb the cost of 40 years. There was not. There was only a kind of sorrow, the specific sorrow of watching someone you are related to discover, far too late, that they have been standing in the wrong place the entire time, holding the wrong opinion like a flag, and that the parade has moved on without them. The glow of the flying carried the day, but the day had to end, and what came after the flying was the part I had actually been dreading, which was the family. There was a receiving line after the flying program. The air station had set it up, the guest of honor shaking hands, and a long line of people formed, and a remarkable number of them were people from the area who had grown up, one way or another, in the orbit of my brother's expensive joyrides joke. People who had heard, at one cookout or another, that the Castellano girl played airplanes on the taxpayer's dime. Those people stood in line for an hour to shake my hand and tell me they were proud of a hometown general. And Wesley stood off to the side and watched his sister become the thing the whole town had come out for, and watched himself become a footnote at an event built around me. He came over eventually because Wesley has never been able to leave a discomfort alone. He has to poke it. He had his hands in his pockets, and he had the old joke loaded, because the old joke was the only tool he had ever owned for handling me. "Quite the show," he said. Taxpayer money well spent, I guess. Here is the thing about a joke that has worked for 40 years. It works because the room agrees to let it. And the room, that afternoon, did not agree. The people standing near us, people who had just heard a 2-star general read my combat record over the loudspeakers, did not laugh. They looked at Wesley the way you look at a man who has told a joke at the wrong funeral. The line landed in silence, and I watched my brother feel the silence. And I watched him understand, possibly for the first time in his life, that the joke had never been funny. It had only ever been permitted. I did not rescue him from it. I had spent a long time rescuing people from the consequences of how they treated me, smoothing it over, keeping the peace, and I was done with that particular labor. But I did not twist the knife either. I just looked at my brother, 62 years old, holding a punchline that had finally stopped working, and I told him the truth. "You can keep the joke, Wes," I said. "I don't need you to put it down anymore." It was not a counterattack. It was a door closing, gently, on a room I had been standing in for 40 years, waiting to be let further inside. I had stopped auditioning. That was the whole of it. Somewhere over Iraq, a long time ago, I had run out of things to prove. And I had never gone looking for new ones, and that included proving anything to my brother. He could think whatever he wanted about me now. The thinking had finally become his problem instead of mine. My mother was at the rail in her wheelchair, 84 years old, and she had watched the entire exchange. She had watched her son reach for the old weapon and find it broken in his hand. And she had watched her daughter decline to pick up a weapon of her own. When I came over to her, she reached up and took my hand, and she was crying, a little, in the quiet way she did everything. "You didn't even raise your voice," she said. "I ran out of things to prove somewhere over Iraq, Mom," I said. "I've had a long time to get quiet about it." She held onto my hand. "I kept everything," she said. "All of it. It's in the car." I did not understand what she meant yet. I would, within the hour. But I stood there holding my mother's hand at the rail of the air station, watching my brother stand alone at the edge of a crowd that had come to honor me, and I felt something I had not expected to feel, which was not triumph. It was something closer to pity, and underneath the pity, the first loosening of 40 years of held breath. What my mother had in the car was the shoebox. It was not the same shoebox from when I was 14. That one had filled up decades ago. This was the third or fourth box, and between them they held 40 years of newsprint. Every article, every base paper write-up, every photograph, every line of type that had ever carried my name. She had kept her promise. She had kept all of it. And now, with a deliberateness that told me she had been planning this for a long time, my mother had Wesley bring the box from the car, and she put it in his hands in front of me. "You should read what I kept," she told him, "since you never asked." I watched my brother open a shoebox full of his sister's life. I watched him take out a yellowed clipping from 2005, a base paper article with a photograph of me in a flight suit next to a Harrier, the headline about the first woman to fly that aircraft in combat off our line. I watched him read it. I watched him take out another and another. He sat down on the bumper of the car and he went through that box clipping by clipping. 40 years of a career he had reduced to 2 words, and he did not say anything for a long time. I watched his hands while he read. There was one clipping he held longer than the rest, and I leaned over to see which one it was, and it was the 2004 piece, the one about the night I will never put down, the patrol and the danger close, and the young voice that came back up on the radio steadier. The base paper had run it small, 3 paragraphs, because that is how the base paper ran everything. But it was there, in print, the bones of the thing I had carried alone for 20 years, because there was no one at my table who could hear it. My brother read those 3 paragraphs twice. I saw him read them twice. And I watched something move across his face that I had never once seen there in 62 years, which was the understanding that while he had been at home, making a joke out of the word joyride, his little sister had been over a war, doing the one thing he had been raised to believe was the only thing that mattered, keeping Marines alive on the ground, and that he had missed it. All of it, on purpose, because seeing it would have cost him the story he preferred about himself. When he finally spoke, he did not look up from the box. "Dad never said it," he said, "about you, about any of this." He turned a clipping over in his hands. "I think I kept doing his job for him. after he died. I just kept doing it. It was not a full apology. It was something rarer and in some ways harder, which was a man saying out loud the shape of the thing he had done without dressing it up. I sat down next to him on the bumper. We were two gray-haired people on the back of a car at an air show, and the distance between us was 40 years wide, and I knew it was not going to close in an afternoon because that is not how distance works. "I'm not asking you to salute me, Wes," I said. "I never wanted that from you. I'm asking you to stop subtracting me. That's the whole price. You don't have to add anything. Just quit taking me away from myself every time my name comes up." "That's it. That's the entire bill." He nodded at the shoebox. He did not hug me. We are not a family that hugs, and I was not going to pretend on that day of all days that we were something we were not. But he closed the box gently like it was worth something, which was new, and we sat there on the bumper and watched a Harrier get towed back toward the hangar, two siblings standing for the first time in our lives on the same side of the rope line. The air show ended. The crowds went home. Life, as it does, resumed, and nothing was tied up in a bow because real things rarely are. A few weeks later, a letter came. An actual letter, handwritten, on lined paper, and the return address was the air station. It was from Corporal Hargrove. He had thought about it a great deal, he wrote, the morning at the stairs, and what I had said about the difference between the easy call and the right call. He wanted to know, if it was not too much to ask, whether I would tell him how a person got from where he was standing to where I had been. He wanted to know about flight school. He wanted to fly. I sat at my kitchen table with that letter for a long while, because here's what I had not had at his age. I had not had a hand reaching back down the stairs. I had had a mother and a shoebox and a promise I made myself on a back step. And that had been enough, barely, but it should not have to be barely. So I decided I would answer the letter. I would tell the kid everything I knew. I wrote him back that same night, longhand, because a letter deserves a letter. I told him the road was long and that the flying was the smallest part of it, that anyone with good hands and a strong stomach can be taught to fly an aircraft, and that the actual job is everything around the flying, the discipline and the studying and the failing and the getting up. I told him there would be people in his path who would take one look at him and decide he did not belong, and that they would be wrong, and that the only answer to them was the one I had used my whole life, which was to be undeniable and to keep my mouth shut and to let the work speak. I told him to check the lanyard, every time, to do the work of the right call even when the easy call is sitting right there asking to be made. And I told him the thing my mother had told me, because it was not mine to keep, it was only mine to pass along. You do not have to win them over. You just have to go. Then I gave him my number and I told him to call me when he hit the first wall, because he would, and because there is no reason for a good young Marine to hit it alone when there is an old one standing at the top of the stairs with her hand out. Wesley called me too around the same time, and the call was the strangest and best thing of all, because Wesley had never once in his life called me to talk about my work. He was awkward about it. He talked around it for 10 minutes. And then he asked me a question, an actual question, about the Harrier, about how the thing flew, about what it was like to bring it to a hover. He did not apologize. He asked. And from my brother, I understood, a question was the apology. A question meant he had finally gotten curious about the sister he had spent 40 years being certain about. My mother told me, on one of our calls, that I could throw the shoebox out now. The job was done, she said. They had finally seen it. I told her to keep it. Not as proof anymore, Mom, I said. We don't need the proof now. Keep it as a story, it's a good one. Somebody should have it. And one evening, near the end of all this, I drove back out to the air station by myself and stood at the fence line in the gold light at the end of the day, the way I used to stand on the back step when I was a girl, and I took stock. The man who would not say he was proud was 11 years in the ground. The brother who had spent 4 decades subtracting me was, clumsily, learning to add. My mother was near the end of her life and at peace. A boy who had waved me off a staircase wanted to climb the one I had climbed. And the runway was still there, exactly where it had always been, the one thing in my life that had never once asked me to prove I belonged on it. I stayed at that fence until the light was almost gone. A single jet came back into the pattern while I stood there. Some late training flight, and it crossed overhead with that deep, tearing roar, and the chain link hummed under my fingers the way the dishes had hummed in the rack when I was 11. and for about 4 seconds, I was a girl on a back step again, completely alive, wanting a thing I had been told I had no business wanting, except now I had spent a whole life having it. The girl on the back step and the old woman at the fence were the same person, and the line between them was not made of medals or stars or anything anyone had pinned on me. It was made of the simple, stubborn, daily decision to go, repeated for 40 years, in the face of every voice that told me to sit back down. I stood at that fence, and I asked myself the question I think a lot of people carry and never say out loud. What is a life's work worth if the people who were supposed to see it never did? For 40 years, I had aimed that question at one closed door, and the door had stayed closed, and I had flown anyway. Standing at the fence, I finally had my answer, and it had nothing to do with the door. Months later, I met Corporal Hargrove back at the air station, and I walked him through the flight school application line by line. The boy who had stood at the bottom of the stairs and waved me off was standing next to me now, climbing, and I do not think the symmetry was lost on either of us. I told him the truth about the road ahead, that it was long and that it would try to wave him off too, more than once, and that the only thing to do about that was to keep checking the lanyard, keep doing the work of the right call, and go. There was a family dinner that fall, smaller than the old ones and kinder. Wesley had a new in-law there, a young man marrying one of his kids, and at some point the young man asked Wesley what his sister did. And my brother, who had spent 40 years saying the word joyrides, looked across the table at me and said, "This is my sister Vera. She flew Harriers in combat. First woman to do it off that line." He said it plainly, like a fact he was proud to own, and the old joke did not come out, and it never came out again. It had finally been retired and replaced by the only thing that should ever have been in its place, which was the truth. I caught my mother's eye across the table when he said it, and neither of us made a thing of it, because making a thing of it might have scared it off. But we both knew what we had just heard. We had heard a man set down a weapon he had carried for 40 years and pick up, in its place, a simple sentence that happened to be accurate. It is a small thing, one sentence at a dinner table. It is also, I have come to believe, very nearly everything. My mother lived to see it. She did not have a great deal of time left, and she knew it. And one afternoon near the end, she held my hand and looked at me with those quiet eyes that had seen me clearly when no one else in that house would. And she said the thing she had said to me when I was 14 years old with an empty shoebox in my lap. "I told you," she said. "You just had to go." She had been right for 40 years. She had been the only one who was right, and she had never once needed me to prove it to her. And that, I think now, is the rarest kind of love there is, the kind that sees you before the loudspeakers do. So I will leave you with what I learned at the fence line in case you are carrying the same question I carried. Some of the people who are supposed to see you never will. A parent, a sibling, someone whose pride you would trade a great deal to have. You can spend your whole life on the back step waiting for them to look up from their plate, and they may never do it, and that will not be your failure. It will be theirs. But the work is real whether they see it or not. The sky does not care whose daughter you are. The runway never once asked me to prove I belonged on it. And the strangers, it turns out, the strangers will recognize the truth of what you did long before the people at your own table ever do. And on the right morning, on the right line, they will turn, all at once, and find your face in the crowd, and they will say your name like it means something, because it does. Do not wait at a closed door for a recognition that lives out on the runway. Go to the runway. Do the work and fly anyway. If you've ever watched someone in your own family decide who you were and then refuse to update it, no matter what you went on to accomplish, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Do you think I was right to keep that corporal beside me instead of letting him be disciplined? Would you have shown your brother the shoebox, or would you have kept it to yourself? And have you ever stopped waiting for a proud that was never going to come and found your peace somewhere else instead? Tell me about it. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while.